Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to, I think it's day 6 now of, no, day 5 of Ramadan Dawah training. And as you guys know, we go live every single day at 6 p.m. British Standard Time, and we cover a different aspect of the Gorab. And previously, as you guys remember, we did God's existence, motivation, and to cover oneness, I have with myself today Salahuddin Patel. Assalamu alaikum, Salahuddin.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, so pleased to be here.
How are you doing? You're wearing a nice Japanese shirt right there. I think it's Japanese.
That's correct, mashallah. You know your languages. So yeah, this is from the time when we were in Japan and we did some dawah in Japan. Yeah, so I thought today would be wear something different for the show, inshallah.
Excellent, excellent. So as you guys know, it's very important that we convey the message of Islam in this month, and we do our part. So I just want to get a few thoughts of Salahuddin on our campaign, which we're mentioning every day, of viral awakening. Why did we come up with it, and why is it important to engage with people despite this current crisis?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So alhamdulillah, a viral awakening. You know, alhamdulillah, when we reflect about what's happened across the world over the last few months, where this thing has impacted the whole world like I can't remember in the history of humanity, where the whole world has been impacted. So we thought, you know, look, our main objective in our era is to go out there and share Islam with humanity, to reconnect humanity back to Allah. But now we're in a position where everyone is locked down, they're in their homes. And not only that, this is a major sign from Allah. So of course, people are talking about coronavirus from a practical perspective, you know, social distancing, protect yourself, self-isolate, you know, do all of these things so that we can protect. But like what's not really being discussed is the greater implication that this is in fact, a sign from Allah. Yes. So mashallah, the brothers and the sisters within the organization, they put their heads together and they said, you know what can we do? And they came up with this amazing campaign, a viral awakening, you know, and the whole point of the campaign is to focus on engaging in dawah conversations whilst online via Facebook. And alhamdulillah, we've been running it for a few weeks now, and the conversations that we've been having are immense. You know, people are interested, they want to know what's happening, what is the purpose of their lives. People are learning about Islam, people are embracing Islam. Yes. You know, mashallah. So alhamdulillah, this is the sort of background to a viral awakening, inshallah, campaign.
And you know, the beautiful thing about this campaign is that it can be done from home, and it can be done by anybody in the world. Inshallah, we're going to have more details about the campaign as we're evolving, because obviously this is a campaign which is new and it's you know, in its genesis, and inshallah we're going to grow it and get more and more people involved. So I really like that you mentioned this is a sign from God, because everything is a sign from God, but also when something like this happens, it starts to make us think about the people who are less fortunate than us, people who are sometimes, people who may not know the message of Islam, they may not know about God, they may not know about how the belief in God is a comfort during times of difficulty. So it's very important that we share these things. Now, Salahuddin, I wanted to bring you on to obviously cover the of Gorab. So oneness is a core key component when conveying the message of Islam. And as you guys remember, every single time that we are dealing with difficult questions, we want to bring people back to the Gorab, back to this central idea that none is worthy of worship except Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Allah's messenger. So if someone accepts that, everything else is completely and utterly irrelevant. So we covered God's existence quite thoroughly. We covered the fitrah with Sheikh Fahad. Before that, we covered motivation. And today we're going to be covering oneness. Now, before we cover oneness, I wanted to bring Salahuddin to cover this, because he came from a Hindu background, and he chose essentially the oneness of God, chose Tawheed. So I just want him to give a few brief thoughts on that for a few minutes, about how he chose Tawheed over Shirk, and how it's natural and how it makes more sense.
SubhanAllah, Jazakallah khairan. So yeah, just to give you a brief introduction to myself, My name is Salahuddin Patel. I was born into a Hindu family. I grew up in the UK, London, so I'm a Londoner. And like most people that are born into a specific religion, what you do is you follow your family traditions. You don't really question it. So if
Yeah,
you're born into a Christian family, you follow Christianity. So for myself, it was Hinduism, and
yeah,
the Hindu sort of community is very sort of close knit. So I remember growing up, we used to go to the temple. So I don't know if people know much about Hinduism, but just to touch upon that, Hinduism is a religion that is basically idol worship, right? Worshipping gods via idols. It's based upon pantheism, this understanding that God manifests himself in the creation. There's also an understanding of anthropomorphology as well, basically the use of avatars. So Hinduism is a religion that originates back from India, right? They say it's one of the world's oldest religions, but obviously we know that is false,
yeah,
right? Because Islam is the world's oldest religion. It is the original religion. But in terms of a religion, yes, it's one of the ancient religions. And if you really think about sort of idol worship, and this is something that I sort of focus on, is that if you look at all throughout the history of humanity, we've had different forms of idol worship throughout the ages and throughout different civilizations.
yeah,
However, most of them have become redundant, right? They've been replaced by either, Christianity or by Judaism or by Islam or even just sort of other sorts of religion. But these are the three main religions. But in India, this is the only place on the earth where idol worship is still prominent,
yeah,
right? And it's sort of growing. So you have like almost, 1 billion adherents of Hinduism. So I grew up into that sort of religion. I remember going to the temples, and if you know anything about Hinduism, you have these idols, right? Sorry, let me sort out my hands. These idols that you go to the temple and worship. So for example, Ganesh, right? So Ganesh is one of these idols with an elephant head and a human body. And you have Ram and Sita. And look, I'm not here to disrespect anyone's other's religion, yeah. I'm just here to share my story, right? So I grew up into believing this. So I followed this because I thought it was true. You follow what your family teaches you. You take them as an authority. But as you go older, especially living in the West, learning about different religions, and the great thing about London is because it's so multicultural, you come across people from so many different backgrounds, right? Um, so I grew up with Muslims going to school, but one thing I didn't realize is the sort of teachings of Islam. To be honest, my understanding of Islam was it was the religion of the Pakistani people.
yeah,
Yeah, and I didn't know much about it, to be honest, right?
yeah,
But as I grew older, I realized this understanding of worshiping many gods, worshiping these idols, it's something that doesn't logically or rationally doesn't make any sense,
yeah,
especially idols that are made by someone else's hand. This idea of a metamorphosis between an elephant and a human body, and somehow that this needs to be worshipped. This makes no sense at all. And this comes back to, alhamdulillah, guidances from Allah that we are all the creation of Allah. That I went on this journey of sort of acknowledgement, awareness, of understanding, of rejection. It came to a point where I realized, this Hinduism, it just doesn't make any sense. However, you still follow sort of your family culture, your family identity and
yeah,
understanding. And just sort of fast forward to sort of university, alhamdulillah, I had some really good friends from a Pakistani African background. And in fact, what they were trying to do is they were trying to do dawah to a friend of theirs who was Christian that they grew up with, this brother called Jason, right? And I was with them, close with them. We went to a local university in London, and I used to go and I used to hang around with them. I used to spend time. In fact, I was part of their family. In fact, their extended family. I used to go around, so I used to see the beautiful qualities that this Muslim family would have. They were very respectful, very clean, very kind, very generous. All of these sorts of qualities And then once that sort of information was given, this Dawah material was given to this brother Jason, they just happened to give it to me as well.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, subhanallah, and you know you hear this cliche so many times, Subboor, yeah, from people, it's like a light bulb goes off in your mind. It's like, what on earth? This is
Mm.
exactly what I believe. And that
Mm.
links back to the oneness of God, which was what was the sort of the changing point for me, the turning point to embrace Islam was the understanding or the Tawheed or the oneness of Allah, that God is one. There's only one creator, right? And this creator is deserving of worship. Regardless of where you're from on the planet, this God is the same God, right?
Mhm.
And people are misdirecting their understanding and worship of this God. But the understanding that Islam presents is true. God is
Yeah.
one. God is eternal. God doesn't have no beginning, no end. You know, God doesn't have no offspring. And, you know, God is uniquely different from his creation. Completely different what Hinduism teaches, right? Because there are different variants. And some people don't know this about Hinduism, but Hinduism is almost like saying monotheism, Sabor, yeah? Because there's
So
so
cool.
many different variants. Yeah, so many different variances of Hinduism on the Indian continent, different ways of practicing different gods that they worship. But essentially, the foundations are the same, right? Which is idol worship, which is pantheism, which is anthropomorphology, and all of this understanding. So, alhamdulillah, by the permission of Allah, I went on this journey. Someone gave me some materials, I read it, and by the permission of Allah, I was guided. But the turning point, exactly what you said, was the oneness.
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful story because it kind of reminds me of the fact that the fitrah is alive. Yeah. So you didn't need to have a sophisticated argument for oneness. It was very simple. You know, God is one. God is not like his creation. It wasn't some difficult philosophical concept. Some people are basically asking about how to give dawah to a pantheist who believes you have one God. I mean, it's all subordinate. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into oneness. We're going to get into the different reasons why our belief in oneness is different to others. I just want to say a few words about some of the things that Salahuddin was mentioning. Firstly, I think it's extremely important to understand that this oneness aspect, which most Muslims gloss over, if you don't fully understand this, this basically means you will not be that effective at giving dawah to a group of people which represent a fifth of humanity. And that's no small matter, right? I mean, Hindus do account for about 1 billion people. And also, I think it's important to make a distinction between the approach the Ayera has and the approach which is used by other people when it comes to Hindus, in which you would have a Muslim memorizing the Padma Purana, the Bhagavad Gita, and these other manuscripts, and then try to give evidence from them that Hinduism is actually monotheistic and you should actually believe in one God. So I just want to put this to Salahuddin. Salahuddin, so, you know, there are video clips online, and there are even materials on this that if you memorize this particular verse from this particular Hindu script, and then you basically tell people this is what Hindus believe, do you see that as a good approach?
Well, this is a really good question, you know, because this is a question that's always asked, you know, by people when they know that I'm a revert from a Hindu background. It's like, how do we give dawah to Hindus? What's the best approach? And like one of the approaches that you mentioned is like, you know, there's so many scriptures that they have, and a lot of these scriptures they actually talk about this oneness, right? So you see some of these prominent da'is memorizing these things and then using it in terms
Yeah.
of debates and articulation. But in reality, reality, guys, that when it comes to Hindus, they don't know much about their religion, unfortunately. They're Hindus by culture, right? So even if you were going to press them and ask them about the theology that they believe in to explain it, they won't be able to do that. Even if you were to ask them about the religious texts that are associated with that religion, they won't be able to tell you. They may be able to tell you a few things. So in terms of approach, where you're trying to take this Hindu who's been brought up in a Hindu family, who doesn't have a real sense of understanding of their religion, it's more cultural. What you want to do is you want to appeal to what Subboor spoke about was their fitra, their natural inclination, to get them to reflect and think, look, you're worshiping all of these idols that are made by hand. Is that even logical and rational? Because I tell you one thing about India, if you know about India, is that they are very focused when it comes to education,
Yes.
right? Very competitive, right? So you see a lot of engineers, mathematicians, IT engineers, all of these people that use this capability. It shows they have this ability to be logical and rational. And even if you think about the history of India and academia, a lot of philosophy was developed in India,
Yeah.
right? So they have this capability. So again, what we need to do is what's relevant for today's day and age is to appeal to the reason and rationality and appeal to this idea of like, does that actually make sense? What is the correct understanding of a God? A God that is not based upon, your understanding, which is geographical. Because I'll be honest with you, Subboor, my understanding of religion growing up was very geographical. It was a bit like this, that the Christians, they are the ones that are based in the West, right? And then you've got basically the Indians, they're Hindu. Then you've got the Far East, they're sort of Buddhist, right? And then you've got the Middle East and Pakistan, they are the ones that are Muslim. And that's just the way it is. But of course, this makes no sense because
Yeah.
we're all the same, right? So I would say that that's not a good technique, guys. Don't waste your time trying to look at sources and trying to memorize text. That's not going to work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think a good point that you raised is firstly, a average Hindu man or woman would have no idea what you're talking about. They'd be completely oblivious to this point. They'd be completely, they may even be curious. They'll be like, wow, Padma Purana, I never heard of that. An additional problem is if you start off the conversation with the idea that this is the authority, the Hindu scripture, and then you give evidence that we should believe in one God based upon some verses of the Vedas, and then say that Hindu person goes to a Pandit, goes to a priest, a Hindu priest, and asks, a Muslim said this to me, does this verse mean this? They will get, of course, a different answer. And then they'll come back and they'll say, no, you were wrong. And then you will try to change the argument by giving them something else, but you've already been shown to be wrong once. So you've lost sort of credibility. So there's that point. Now, one other point which I want to clarify before we get into the evidence that oneness makes sense, and we're going to cover Christianity soon because some people are asking about Christianity. Should we use the Bible? Should we use the verses from the Bible? Is that a good approach? Salahuddin, a few years ago, I was giving Dawah, and with us, we had a young person who also went out to convey the message of Islam. And he was obviously trying to speak to people and saying, look, we as Muslims believe in one God. And he happened to come across Mormons, right? And he said, we believe in one God. And the Mormon said, well, we of course believe in one God. We both believe in one God. It's not an issue. So then he came back at me and he said, well, they said we believe in one God. So how do you respond? So my first question to you is it just the same thing when Muslims say Tawheed or oneness of God? Is it the same as when Christians say there's one God, Sikhs say there's one God, and even some Hindus say ultimately there's one God? Is it the same thing?
MashaAllah, this is a really good question and an important question because when you look at a lot of the dialogue that happens across the world and a lot of the narrative, the popular narrative, when they talk about the great monotheistic faiths, right? They group Christianity, Judaism, and Islam into one. And also you mentioned that even in Hinduism, if you were to look into it, they would also say that we also believe in one God. But what's important to clarify is, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the God of confusion. The Quran came, revelation came to make it very clear and very precise, the correct understanding who our creator is. So when you delve into sort of the theology of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and their understanding of this, they say that they believe in one true God. There are clear distinctions and differences. And Islam is the only religion where when we talk about monotheism, this is what we say is pure monotheism. pure Tawheed, because that oneness is one, right? And it's completely different from the understanding of the other religions. And that's the beauty of why people embrace Islam,
Yes.
by learning about the Tawheed of Allah, right? That when we talk about the oneness of Allah, when we say Allah is one, we say Allah is uniquely one without any partners. That's the first aspect, right? That God is not made up of many parts. So when you compare that with sort of Christianity, they say, you know, the Trinity, but it is one God, but it is Trinity. No, that's not the understanding of the one true God. This is the one God. And if you go to Hinduism, they'll tell you, well, yeah, there's one God, but God manifests himself down in all of these idols, right? There's different forms of God. No, that's not the correct understanding of God according to Islam, that this God is one, this God is independent, self-sufficient, this God is the creator, the sustainer of everything that exists. This God is eternal, meaning has no beginning, no end. This God has no parents. This God has no offspring, right? And most importantly, this God is unlike the creation. So anything you can imagine in your mind, what you think is God, that is not God, right? And you know, when we do the Dawah Subboor, one of the things that we like to use is analogies so that people can understand and sort of make sense of things, right? So there's a clear distinction. So one of the analogies I sort of use when speaking to people about this, I say, look, you know what a carpenter is, yeah? And they'll say, yeah, a carpenter is a person who makes pieces of furniture, for example, a table. So then I said, okay, look, there's a carpenter, he produces a table. Can the carpenter ever become the table? And the answer is, what are you talking about? Why are you asking a stupid question, right? But then I delve deep. I said, but yeah, but let's look into this. You know, can the carpenter? They'll say, no, of course not. What is the distinction between the two? Well, the nature or the makeup of the carpenter and the makeup and the nature of the table is two different things, right? That can never happen. So we say, look, this is not exactly, but this is an analogy for you to understand your creator, that the creator is the creator of everything that exists, but the creator is unlike his creation. Just like the carpenter is unlike the table, the creator is unlike his creation. So God is not a man, God is not a fish, God is not an idol, God is not a tree. God is God that sits outside the creation. And you know, this is mentioned beautifully in Surah Ikhlas, the 112th chapter of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, say he is God, the one and only, the eternal and absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very beautiful way of explaining it, because these are simple analogies, like the carpenter. It's a very, very simple analogy. And we always need to make this distinction that you've made, Salahuddin, that when a Hindu says one God, ultimately, they believe that there's many demigods, essentially, right? And everything is God. When Sikhs say there's one God, God is within the universe. When Christians say God, they have the God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. So, you know, we can break this down into three, there's three areas, but we can also break it down into two areas. So firstly, you have the fact that there's one deity. There is one creator overall. And this is where the vast majority of religions, including arguably Hinduism, believe ultimately there's one reality. There's one reality which is all powerful. So Christians believe that, Hindus believe that, Sikhs believe that. That's quite standard. The second part is that that deity is the only one worthy of worship. There is nothing that is worthy of worship except that being. And that's where the vast majority of religions fail, right? So in Christianity, you have the worship of Jesus. In Sikhism, you have God being within his creation, and so on and so forth. And lastly, that God is beyond our imagination, beyond being likened to a human being or anything else. And again, this is where the comparing God to his creation is what a lot of religions fail in. Now, each one of these areas, we believe we can rationally justify. Okay? So the first point I want to put to you is, why is it, even though it's intuitive and most people still believe it, it's still worth going into, why is it that we believe there's one supreme Lord and not two and three or four?
Well, this again comes back to our nature. It's essentially that, in Islam, what we believe is that we are a creation of God. And not only just that, that we were created for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And that purpose is to glorify God. So part of our makeup is essentially this part of us that is sort of yearning to sort of connect to God, basically. And this is what we call the fitra, right? The natural innate state that a human being is born into. And what happens is a person's upbringing, a person's environment, a person's doubts, a person's desires, all of these things combined basically essentially make up whether that person is in line with that natural state, that fitra, or they basically go on to something else and they sort of misdirect that natural state into some other sort of manifestation, right? So we as Muslims, we believe this is the correct state, that the natural state is to believe in one God. That's a natural part. If you were to sort of ask a population, they will naturally come to this conclusion. And in fact, there's studies have been done where even children, who sort of studies have sort of postulated that, if they were to test children, that children will naturally come to this conclusion without any sort of information being transferred to them, meaning believing in some sort of greater power and that this power is one. And also, that's one aspect. You have the natural innate aspect, but you also have the rational aspect, right? We are beings that are also rational. So when it comes to thinking about this from a rational perspective, using our intellect, when we're talking about God and we're defining God, we're saying God is all powerful, all knowing, all seeing, and the attributes of Allah are innumerable, God are innumerable. If you try to apply this now logically and rationally to multiple beings, it just doesn't follow. How can you have an all-powerful God that are two beings? You can't, right? So logically and rationally, that doesn't make sense. And thirdly, another way you can come to this conclusion is by observations, right? When we look at the world that we live in, when we look at the universe that we occupy, that we see these laws that govern, our existence. And if we look at them, they are in harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if there are multiple gods, they would discuss, maybe argue that, this law should be this way or this law. Then there will be sort of chaos, disunity. In fact, maybe there wouldn't even be any sort of existence, right? So put all of these things combined, your natural state, your reason, your rationality, your observation, it's very easy to come to that conclusion that there can only be one true God.
Yeah, and I love the example you gave, because this is exactly what Allah mentions in the Quran, that, the words to the effect that if there were multiple gods, the heavens and the earth would be in chaos. And that's absolutely true. I mean, from the atom to a galaxy, we have a harmonious creation, and that is a sign of Tawheed. Also, we can add to this that the concept of two all-powerful beings is obviously a contradiction, right? It's a contradiction in terms. So God has to be one all-powerful being. It has to be one by definition. If you have two gods, then one will limit the other. So automatically, by definition, God is one. And something which is important here to highlight, which you mentioned right at the beginning of your answer, was it is absolutely natural. Nobody walks out and looks at nature and looks at everything and is on their fitra, on their natural state, and says Trinity or says something else. We would say there is a creator. There's one all-powerful creator. Okay, fantastic. Now, the second is the sticking point between Islam and every other pretty much religion, which is that in Islam we believe only God should be worshipped, only God should be asked for help. Our love, our obedience, our hope, our trust, our fear, everything is for God alone. And other religions would say, well, it's like a CEO, you can't go to the CEO, you have to go to the manager. We have these saints, or we have these, there's a big focus, as you know, in the Catholic faith on saints. In of course, what's it called, Hinduism, you have the demigods. So you have all these intercessors, right? And it's not just about worshiping God directly. So how can we show that this is rational, that you should worship the Creator alone?
Well, again, again, when we put all of these elements together, that if you're talking about a being that is all powerful, that's all knowing, that's all seeing, and this is the one that has created everything, and this is the one that's deserving of worship, it naturally follows that the one that you should really be asking and thinking and sort of glorifying is the one true God, because everything else is a creation of God, right? And I was really reflecting upon this recently. I recently went on a trip to Umrah with my sister just before, the pandemic and COVID happened. And alhamdulillah, it was an amazing blessing. But there was something in Mecca that I did see before, but I'd never sort of experienced. And that is when you go to the clock tower, on the ground level, behind the escalators, there's like this reception area. And what they're sort of selling there is the exhibition and going up to the sort of clock itself. So I thought, okay, you know what? We've got some time. Let's go and check it out. So basically, you get the ticket and you go up 85 floors, right to the top. And then at the top is this amazing, phenomenal exhibition that I haven't seen the likes of anywhere in the world. And I'm talking about, I live in London and we have amazing museums in London and in the West, and I've been to a lot of them. But this was something completely unique because what it focused on was cosmology, it focused on the universe, it focused on the stars, the celestial planets, all of these things. And what they had done, they had drawn models. And then when you go through that, and this is something that maybe maybe you'll speak about in another show about the role of science and religion, is that when I was observing this and I was getting a great understanding of the universe that we inhabit and the beauty within it and the size of it and how minuscule that we are, that I began to realize, my gosh, a lot of the things that we worry about, number one, they're insignificant. And the greatness of this creator is you can't even fathom, because they talk about, the stars in the galaxy or the universe. There are more grains of sand on this earth than there are sort of galaxies. Forget planets, galaxies. Yeah, that and the universe inhabits. So you can't even fathom the size. So if that is the creation of God, and God sits outside of that, then my gosh, all you need to do is thank that God, because that God has all the power. If that God is created that vast, something that intricate, that beautiful, then why are you going to any other intercessor? Why are you going to a man? Yes, that person may have been close to God, he was more devout. Makes no sense. Go to the one that has the ultimate power, yeah? And this is something that, I took on board, and I learned that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the God Almighty, is capable of doing anything. Don't worry about it, your current situation, what you're facing in your life, any issues. Go directly to God, because God is in complete control of everything. And God, when we reflect upon our lives, Subboor, you look at your life, I look at my life, how we all came together and before and what's going on. You see that there's a plan at hand. There is a guiding hand of Allah, and we are on that journey. And that journey is just essentially for us to connect to this one true God. So what I was doing before, and this is sort of my own understanding, is that other religions, what they're doing is they're misdirecting this gratitude and thanks to something other than the one true God, right? And again, we like to use analogies in the Dawah. One of the analogies I use to sort of make this point is, maybe you guys that are listening in, maybe you can play along as well. Imagine, I want you guys to imagine, yeah, I'm the wealthiest man on the planet, right? And I've got I've got a huge amount of money. And what I want to do for you, Subboor, yeah, is I want to give you 10 billion pounds as a gift because you're my friend, right? 10 billion pounds, right? And all of you guys that are tuning in, 10 billion pounds. But there's a condition to that. For that 10 billion pounds, I want you to give me both your eyes.
No way.
Come on, man, 10 billion pounds. You were putting your thumbs up and everything.
Yeah.
No way.
Not,
Yeah.
not,
Whenever
not,
you
not, not even one eye. Forget two eyes.
subhanallah, not even one eye. Yeah. So when I ask people of this, they normally say the same thing. There's no way, right? Why? Because your eyes are irreplaceable, right? So then I continue with the analogy. He said, okay, imagine, um, I said, you know what? I understand that, of course, your eyes are precious to you. Keep the 10 billion pounds, right? Because we're friends. What would you do at this point, Subboor? I've just given you 10 billion pounds.
I'll be eternally grateful.
Eternally grateful. What would you do with the money? And you guys play along at home as well, like tuning in. What would you guys do with that money? What would you do?
Just go on a shopping spree, buy out all the buildings in Southall and evict Imran Hussain. Buy an island and put people on
MashaAllah.
there and make them fight. There's loads of things I could do.
Exactly. And look, that's it. That's the point. The point is that, that is a gift for you. There's no sort of strings attached, right? Just like, if I were to give you a bar of chocolate, you would appreciate that. So the main thing here is you would say thank you, right? Now, you would say thank you as I give you that gift. Common sense, right? Now, you mentioned Imran Hussain, so I'm just going to bring him in here, yeah? Because you mentioned his name. Now, imagine I gave you that 10 billion pounds, but instead of thanking me, you started thanking Imran Hussain, who had nothing to do with me giving you that money.
It doesn't make any sense.
That's illogical, irrational. Why on earth would you do that, right?
Yeah.
And this is an analogy about what you're talking about. Why would you worship? So when we talk about worship, let's just break down worship. What do we mean by worship? It's very simple. Number one is to know who your creator is, because unless you know your creator, how do you know what you're worshiping, right? So having the correct understanding. Then number two, once you know who your creator is and how amazing your creator is and everything that you have is a gift from your creator, then you develop a love for your creator, right? So that's the second thing. You start showing gratitude and thanks. The third aspect of sort of worship is basically now you know that's your creator and he loves you and you love God back, that whatever he tells you to do must be good for you because he made you, right? Your creator made you. So you submit and obey your creator. And then finally, the most important thing as well, all of these are important, that you single out this creator without associating partners, right? With God. This is worship. This is what we mean. So just like using that analogy, I give you that 10 billion pounds. Why on earth would you thank Imran? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So I think, other religions across the world, and I mean no disrespect here, I think they're just misdirecting that natural state that we have, our makeup, which is to worship God. They're worshiping other than God. And that's why, God Almighty has sent messengers and revelations throughout time to clarify this understanding that God is the one that is truly worthy of worship. When we talk about the prophets of God, we talk about Musa, Moses, Noah, we talk about Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, all of these great prophets, that are in the great traditions, they came with the same message: worship this one God alone without associating partners. So, sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but coming back, just
it's a
worship.
perfect example, and I think it's a sticky example. I think people will remember that. And it kind of makes me think about justice, right? It's injustice to thank Imran. It's injustice to believe in something which is powerless, right? And say I take the 10 billion and I absolutely squander it, then I have a belief either that Salahuddin will give me another £100 or Imran will give me. And of course, the belief that Salahuddin will give me should be a lot more, I should be believing in that, because so belief as well, and trust and all of these things are very, very important. Now, I want to come to the last aspect. And actually, once we cover the last aspect, then I think it's very important to mention Trinity because we're getting questions on that. So why is it that we believe that God is unlike his creation, God is distinct from his creation?
Well, it's important to understand that because, you know, when it comes to understanding the nature of God, it's important to truly have a true holistic understanding so that you are not confusing, number one, who God is, and then you're not confusing what the creation of God is. So when we say God is one and uniquely one, when we say God is all knowing, God is all powerful, God is all seeing, God is self-sufficient, God is independent, all of these names and attributes that we learn from, you know, the tradition of Islam,
Yeah.
from the authentic sources, is that these only apply to God. And it's important to make that distinction, that all-knowing, all-powering, self-sufficient. Whereas when we look at the creation of God, that everything has a beginning and everything has an end, that we were born into existence and we will die. We are not self-sufficient. We need air to breathe. We need food to eat. You know, it's the blessed month of Ramadan right now. And you know, the Muslims, including ourselves, we're fasting, and you know, this is following a commandment of God. But you know, like as the hours pass during the day, as it gets later on, you become thirsty, you become more hungry. That just shows you are not self-sufficient. You're not independent. You need these things in order to survive. Whereas God is completely independent of all of these things, right? So it's important to understand that. So when you have a clear understanding of who God is and the creation of God, you won't fall into what I consider, and not what I consider, but what Islam considers is the greatest sin, right? And this is what is so important, is that we as human beings, like we said, we have a different makeup, right? Like we are spiritual, we are physical, we are mental, we are intellectual, and all of these needs need to be fulfilled, right? But the important thing here is that when it comes to God, we need to understand that when our makeup is sort of such that we can either do good things or we can do bad things, right? And we have this understanding of following the commandments of God that are good, and there's also not falling into things that are bad. However, we are human beings, we are weak, right? We will fall into sins, we will make mistakes, right? And the amazing thing that Islam teaches, which is different from any other religion, is that because one of the names of God is He, that He can
Repeat
forgive.
that. Repeat that because we lost you.
Okay, sorry. So what I was saying is because we understand one of the names of God is He is the most merciful, the entirely merciful, that God loves us so much that He will forgive all of our sins, right? From His mercy. He has the right to do that because He wants what's good for us, right? God does not want what's bad for us. However, the one sin that if you die upon will not be forgiven is this idea of shirk, which is associating partners with God. And this is so vital in terms of understanding this topic that we're talking about today, this understanding of Tawheed, that yes, we worship this one true God, but we do not in any way, shape, or form associate partners with God. We do not bring anyone to the same level of God, and we worship this God alone, uniquely alone. And this is part of the testimony of faith, where we affirm that God is the one worthy of worship alone, and we negate any other false gods. So it's
Yeah.
very clear.
Yeah. And, Islamic conception of oneness is so simple, it's intuitive, and it's justified. This is very important to understand. Now, when it comes to obviously oneness and the aspect of God not being like His creation and the logical sort of reasoning for that, this is where we get into obviously the main group that the Muslims will interact with are Christians. Historically, this is true, and even today, even though there is a rise of atheism and agnosticism in the Western world, the majority of people on earth are still Christian in terms of it's the biggest religion. And even in Europe, you have Christianized atheists and agnostics. When they do turn back to faith, they turn back to some form of Christianity. So there's this idea, a very popular idea, that in order for me to show Jesus is not God, I will challenge a Christian by saying, show me where in the Bible Jesus is God, or I will bring up certain verses of the Bible and I'll say, here Jesus said he's not God, and then the Christian will say, no, here he is God, and then you'll have these debates that go back and forth. Now, these are good and well for professional debaters, for formal debates, but on a daily basis that you're dealing with an average Christian who's probably never read the Bible, do you think this is a good approach?
Yeah, and again, another really good question, a question that comes up all the time is, how do we sort of tackle this problem of Trinity when we're speaking to our Christian brothers and sisters in humanity? And I agree with you that, when it comes to trying to use sources that people are not familiar with, meaning they don't have great understanding of, that's not the best strategy going forward. I would rather say, look, the best way to go forward, the same way we spoke about earlier, we're talking about the Hindus employ a similar technique, use what's intuitive, use what's rational, what's logical to appeal to this person's nature, and then inshallah, you make dua, and through Allah will guide these people, inshallah, if they're sincere, and take them on that journey. But it starts with one thing, Subboor. It starts with giving them the information, because this is one thing that is lacking. If you were to talk about Tawheed to the majority of non-Muslims, they won't know what Tawheed is. Their understanding of one God is just one God, just like Christianity mentions and Hinduism mentions. Once they have this understanding of Tawheed, then so many issues like this idea of Trinity can, sort of be sort of deconstructed using appealing to someone's rationality and their sort of natural intuitive state.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we are basically trying to awaken the truth within. This is already intuitive. People already recognize this, I remember many years ago, I was talking to an atheist lady. It was about 10 years ago, actually. I remember it because it was the first time I gave dawah to an atheist, funnily enough. And I remember she said, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God and whatnot. Anyway, she was describing God in a very human way, yeah? So her description of God was like a big man in the sky, gray beard, this type of thing. So I said to her, I actually took out Surah Ikhlas and I read it out to her and I said, look, your conception of God is not what we believe in as Muslims. This is what we believe is God. So I read out the surah, only 4 lines, and I explained it. I said, one creator, nothing like a human being, nothing like his creation. And she turned around and said, that makes sense. And I remember being really shocked at those words because she didn't say, well, I still don't believe in God. And she didn't say, even as an atheist, she could appreciate that this concept of God makes a lot of sense, right? And this is also important to understand that one of the reasons why people don't believe in God is not because they don't believe in God, but because they believe in a conception of God that's a bit of a cartoon. So when someone says, I don't believe in God, we need to sometimes ask, what type of God do you not believe in, right? What type of God do you not believe in? Because I remember many years ago, there was a conversation between Abdul Rahim Green, our chairman, and an atheist. And the atheist said, I don't believe in God. And Abdul Rahim said, well, what type of God do you not believe in? And that person gave a description. And then Abdul Rahim Green said, well, I don't believe in that God either. So I think oneness is one of the most powerful ways of conveying the truthfulness of Islam. Now, one of the things which I want to do is I want to go through the comments because a lot of the comments were related to obviously what you were saying, but we do get some comments which we need to sort of reiterate because obviously some people join a bit late and they may not have heard the earlier parts.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
Okay, so
So I hope
somebody,
everyone is enjoying the show. Yeah.
yeah, so somebody's asking that how do you give dawah to basically a pantheist?
Okay, so very quickly to sort of answer that. Number one, obviously, not many people will call themselves a pantheist. So just determine what sort of religion they're from. And like I said, when it comes to Hinduism, what I would do is the great thing, what we've developed in our era is the sort of the Go-Rap methodology. And the great thing about the Go-Rap methodology is regardless of the person's background, whether they're
Yeah,
Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, you can use the same techniques. And where do these techniques come from? They come from the Quran and the Sunnah, basically. Yeah, you'll find all of these arguments from the Quran. Basically, these are the arguments that the prophets use. So when you're talking to someone who worships idols, let's go back. Let's look at the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. What did he use? What techniques did he employ? Let's
yeah,
look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did he use to employ? And what you find is they use rational arguments to make the case, basically, right? To appeal to people's intellect. Like, does it make sense that you believe in this, this idea of God? And
yeah,
this, even that your religion actually is very geographical. What about all of the other people around the world? Are they supposed to be Hindus as well? Doesn't make any sense. If there's a religion, it has to be universal for all,
yeah,
because through knowledge, we understand that human beings, we're the same, right? We're all that our makeup is the same. And in fact, biologically, I know you study biology,
yeah,
biologically, we are all related
yes,
at the end
absolutely.
of the day, right? So is the religion? It makes sense that there must be one religion. Okay, so if that's the case, let's now think about what would that one religion be? What would be in that religion? And in that religion would be this understanding of this one true God, this concept of tawheedness. So again, look, brothers and sisters, when you're doing dawah, the important thing to understand is to establish the connection with the person, right?
Yeah,
You're not there to debate with someone. You're not there to prove Islam is true. Islam is necessarily true. Our job is to bring that person one step closer, right? So what you want to do is develop a rapport, a relationship, get to know that person, show that you respect them, and they say, look, in terms of this, let's address this logically and rationally. It doesn't actually follow what you're saying. And I've spoken to a few people, and what they've said to me is that when you're engaging in a conversation, at that moment in time, they may disagree with you with what you're saying. So it
yeah,
may appear that what you're saying is falling upon deaf ears. But how many times you hear that, they went home, right? Or they took some down material, they reflected, and they realized, you know what? Actually, what you were saying was making sense. And what are you doing? You're just appealing to their natural state. But what
yeah,
you got to do is do it with the right sort of language, with compassion. So
yeah.
that's what I would say. Just use that same technique, inshallah.
Absolutely. And there's a question asked by Faizan Ali. What if someone says that we believe in the same God as you, but we choose a different path of worship?
Okay, good. So again, a very good question, right? Because this links back to people's cultures and traditions that if there's one God, you hear this all the time. Well, if there's one God and I recognize that one God, well, the way I worship, shouldn't really matter because I'm showing gratitude and thanks to that one true God. So ultimately, it should be accepted. Hang on. We need to address a few things here first because we need to start from the beginning. Like we said, we first identified that there is a God, right?
Yes.
That is worthy of worship. Then we understand that there must be a nature to that God, so we get an understanding of that God. Then if that's the case, then God must have created us for a purpose, right? It naturally follows. What is that purpose? To glorify God, to worship God, right? So then it follows that then that communication must have been communicated by God to humanity. And we
Yeah.
believe that happened through the use of prophets and revelation. And through the revelation, we understand that, look, it makes sense that God knows us best. Now, we may go through life, going through experiences and learning through our experiences, but ultimately, logically, if you were to think about it, if God has communicated to us, he must have communicated to us what's good for us and what's bad for us. So we believe in revelation. So we
Yeah.
believe in the previous revelations. And I know you're going to be covering this in a different topic, but just to quickly cover it, that we believe that the Quran is the last and final revelation of God Almighty to the whole of humanity. And in that, it outlines everything that we need to know for our existence, meaning our history, our purpose, our makeup, what's going to happen in the future, and what we're supposed to be doing as creation of God. And we also have to understand one more important aspect of Islam. When you take the testimony of faith, where you say, I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except God alone, and I bear witness that Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, is his last and final messenger. There's two things that you're testifying to. Number one, you're testifying that this God is the only one worthy of worship, and everything else is false, are false gods. The second thing you're testifying, you're not only testifying that the Prophet Muhammad is the last and final messenger, but you understand that God has created us for a purpose. And essentially, you want to live a life that's pleasing to God. So how are we going to do that? By following the prophets, the messengers. So the last and final messenger was the Prophet Muhammad. So he taught us how is it to live a life that is pleasing to God, how to worship God, not what we think is good, right? But what God prescribes from us. Because at the end of the day, it's a two-way relationship, guys. It's not just about I love God and I do whatever I want. No, if you want the love of God, then you need to start living a life that's pleasing to God, what you were created for. So that's sort of the answer for that question.
Absolutely. And, we always go back to the basics. It's always about going back to the basics. It's not about someone asks a question which looks different, so we need to go do some research and find another answer. The Go-Rap, the beauty of the Go-Rap is it is the one answer to pretty much everything that's being thrown at you. It's a bit of a question which perhaps you can answer because you know more about Hinduism than I do. Don't Hindus have some form of Tawheed when they worship Brahma?
Okay, yeah. So just to give you a background, what they say about Hinduism is, like I said, look, in Hinduism, there's different variants, but essentially there's this idea of idol worship, right? And, you have all of these different gods. So you may have the god of money, the god of love, the god of weather, there's a god for everything essentially, right? And then you would go to that idol and then you would ask for goodness for that particular thing that God is responsible for, right? But then ultimately what they say is all of these gods essentially are makeup of that one true God, which is Brahma, this one God. So when the question here, do Hindus have some kind of Tawheed when they worship Brahma? Look, when we say Tawheed, there is only one understanding of Tawheed.
Yep.
There is no multiple understandings of Tawheed. So you can't have aspects of some kind of Tawheed. There's only Tawheed, and anything else is false understanding of God. And so, yes, they may have this understanding of there's this one ultimate being, and all of these idols filter into this one God, but that is not Tawheed, brother and sisters. Tawheed is very clear that there is only one God worthy of worship. This God is eternal and has no beginning or end, has no parents, no offspring, and is not like his creation. So in Hinduism, they have this understanding that God comes down in the source as a man to understand humanity or to bring some sort of justice to the world. This is incorrect because God is completely different in nature from his creation. God is all knowing, God is all powerful, God is all seeing, God knows everything. God does not need to come into his creation to understand his creation, right? This is a misunderstanding. So I hope that sort of answers the question that the brother was asking.
No, absolutely it does. And we always need to understand that when it comes to Tawheed, we don't just mean directing yourself towards one thing, right? So I decide, I don't know, this chair, that's it. I'm just going to worship the chair alone, right? That's Tawheed. No, it's not. What is that thing that you're worshipping? Is it the true creator of the universe? Is it something that has, and of course, Allah is the word that we use in Arabic, but in different religions, there may be different words. But if fundamentally we're talking about the same reality, we're talking about the same reality, the reality that is the only Lord of the universe, completely distinct from the creation, the only one worthy of worship. So that reality is obviously Allah. Now, other people in other languages, they use God, or, in Polish, I think I've forgotten the word, but there's a word I remembered in Polish for God when I was there with you, Salahuddin. I think it's Boga or something, right? Everybody has a particular word. We're not saying you have to constrain yourself to using only Allah. Like in the Dawah, we can use the word God, to make it easier for people. But fundamentally, it's about what is behind that tawheed, what are we actually speaking about. Okay, so we've run out of time, but I just want Salahuddin to speak briefly about something which is quite important, which is we're in this month of Ramadan. It's the month of the Quran. It's a month in which we're under lockdown. And there's a lot of people who are, worried and going through difficulties at the moment, financial, physical, and, even mental. So what's a piece of advice that you can give to Muslims all across the world who are tuning in?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, really good show, really enjoyed. I hope that the knowledge was and information was beneficial. So when it comes to the blessed month of Ramadan, brothers and sisters, this is something that is amazing, because this is the month that Allah has chosen above all months, right? And this is a month where all of our sins can be forgiven, regardless of what's happened in the past, right? And anything that you're going through as well, obviously, we're going through this global pandemic, and that in itself has brought about a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties that families are facing. But look, understand something, brothers and sisters. And I was reflecting about this. It's funny that you asked this, Subboor, yeah, is that, when we look at people of the past and celebrities, and they talk about, for example, let's talk about, let's say, I don't know, Mahatma Gandhi, yeah? I'm Indian, so they always throw that in my face, you're Mahatma Gandhi. Or even, for example, for example, the Prime Minister of UK during wartime, what was his name? My mind's just gone blank now. I can't think of... Churchill, or even people of the past, Alexander, and all of these people, yeah? And you always reflect about what they did in their lives, and there's so many sort of documentaries that are written, and stories, and even films. And what made me reflect was, subhanAllah, they focus on, obviously it makes sense, they focus on their life, right? However long it may have been. But if you look, really, when we look at our existence on this plane, we actually exist far greater under the earth than above it. Right? Seriously, people are like thousands upon thousands, and no one thinks about, okay, what is happening, to Mahatma Gandhi now in the grave? What's happening to Alexander in the grave? So the point I'm trying to make here, brothers and sisters, is despite what you're going through, life is very short. SubhanAllah, really and truly, there are millions of people out there, they're suffering, you're suffering, we're all suffering, right? But it's only Allah. We spoke about Tawheed today. That is, Allah only is the one that can take us out of this hardship. So focus on Allah. Focus on your connection with Allah. Don't make things complicated. In Ayera, we have a beautiful brother called Andres, and Brother Subboor knows him. He's a Uruguayan revert, mashallah. And he was giving the reminder this week. And one thing that he mentioned is, look, don't complicate things. Why are you complicating things during Ramadan? Keep to the basic. Keep simple. And the simple thing is focus on Allah. Do your best and focus on Allah. So just call out to Allah, develop your relationship with Allah, understand that this life is a test. It's going to end very shortly, it's going to go faster than your eye can sort of blink. And the next life is the eternal life. Jannah, where we will get everything, but you can only get there is if you have Tawheed, you worship Allah alone, you don't associate partners with Allah. So that's the message. Have a blessed Ramadan, brothers and sisters. Focus on Allah, focus on Tawheed, be a good citizen to humanity, get involved in Dawah, and I'll leave you with the last words, but I just want to say anything good that I've said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anything bad is from myself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you, and until next time, Jazakallah khairan, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And it's really nice that all of you guys joined us. So many comments. Sorry we couldn't go through all of them, but we had to get through a lot in one particular session. So again, tomorrow we're going to be covering Revelation and continuing throughout the rest of Ramadan. And from Salahuddin and myself, we'd like to thank you both. We'd like to thank you all for tuning in. And inshallah, we will see you all tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.